are you all?
I'm awesome.
Good.
That's good.
How are you?
I'm good. It's been a kind of a frantic day, oh now this, oh now this, oh now this, oh now this.
Tired is so true.
Rich, are you filming?
Yeah.
Am I going? Okay. Rich asked me to come in to do a bit of a presentation on some of the themes that come up in Avenue Q. Last year when Rich did Rent, I did a presentation on the history of AIDS activism. And this year he asked me to come in and kind of talk about some of the stuff that comes up in the show. Particularly themes of diversity and inclusion and oppression. I want to tell you about myself first before we launch into it so that you know who you're dealing with. My name is Val Soule. I have been living in West Philly since 2001. I actually grew up in Colorado and moved to Philly for a job 15 years ago, something like that. And the job was terrible, but I loved Philly and I've never left. I have worked at an HIV organization called Philadelphia Fight since 2000. So I've been at it in the field of HIV for a long time. And one of the things that I have taken on in that is the sort of activist piece of HIV. And in terms of HIV, and this is true for most movements, there are people and organizations that are affected by it, that's stakeholders. And then there are these organizations that kind of spring up around the stakeholders. But all of that is embedded in a kind of a bigger activist movement of people who care about HIV. So most of the social movements that come into play in Avenue Q, as well as the other things that Project Arts does, the other things that Project Arts is committed to, are embedded in these larger movements. It's not just about individuals fighting injustice, but also groups fighting for it. So obviously I identify as an AIDS activist. I identify as a white person. I identify as a female, but I also identify as a trans person. And I know you can see my facial hair. Everybody else can too. For a lot, I was identified female at birth, and I never felt really in conflict with that. But when I was 18, I got a beard, and I just the boy that I had fallen for. It was right after I moved to college, and the first guy that I had a crush on in college was you've got some whiskers there, you should probably get rid of them. And I was oh, anything to make you think I'm hot, I just was accepted it, accepted that, yes, I should get rid of it. And he came out as gay 3 weeks later, so that was never happening, right? But I took that lesson that I should get rid of it and swallowed it for a long time. So it wasn't until I lived in West Philly that I sort of saw and experienced other ways of being female. I mean, I knew that there were other ways of being female, and that gender was a multicolored thing, a many-splendored thing is the line, but I didn't, it wasn't until I sort of felt like I was in a community that would support me that I felt like I could be different from other women. And so it's now been, I guess, 10 or 11 years that I haven't shaved my face every day. And for me, it was really important that I felt that there were pieces of my body that I didn't have to be at war with. I wasn't at war with my facial hair anymore after I accepted it. But that didn't mean that everybody else accepted it right away, right? And I was really worried about how folks at work were going to take it. Not so much my coworkers, but the clients, the people that I serve. I was kind of worried that they were going to freak out. And everybody just took it in stride. I was the same person when I came back to work with a beard, I was the same person that I had been. I just had facial hair. And so the only people at work now that have a hard time with it are people who are just showing up. People who are just coming and are like, what are you? You know, like, and I get that on SEPTA, and I get it at 30th Street Station, and I get it on the, you know, like I get it wherever I go. This sort of like, I don't really understand who you are. And that's a price that I didn't know that I was gonna pay. But it's still not a greater price than the sort of price I was paying before about feeling like I was at war with my body. So is this another person for the cast?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, hi. Hello. So I identify as a trans person because I know that people see me as a trans person. I have this gender ambiguity that I embrace. And so it also means that I embrace questions. How are you doing? It's nice to see you. You know, I know that what I project, the image that I have in the world is not always easy to read. And so I would rather have people ask me questions than like look at me, take me in, and then never be able to look at me again. Mm-hmm. You know? I identify as a queer person, and for me that means that I am attracted to and, you know, potentially could fall in love with anybody. Don't box me in, kind of that's how I feel about it. You know, when I was young, when I was 15, I fell in love with my best friend, who was a girl, and so I came out in high school as bi, and that was an identity that fit for me for a long time. And then as I started to kind of meet other trans people or people who didn't fall so neatly into the category of male or female, it was clear that bi wasn't a big enough term for me, because bi means bisexual is like, oh, male or female, right? But there are people like myself who sort of occupy multiple realms, and I'm attracted to myself. But I can't actually, I can date myself, that's what I'm working on now, dating myself, but not actually, you know, like I'm not another person. That was a weird thing to say.
Occupying multiple realms. I like that.
And the thing is that everybody does, but there are so many societal pressures to like figure out what realm, what's your label, what's your box, what is the thing that we can slice you into so that I can understand you. And so I think it's really hard to be a person and hold on to these different realms when there's so much pressure to slice off those other pieces of you, or like to fit neatly into a box. But really, like, I just have had to kind of like, I feel like elbow my way out of the box a little bit. So with all of that being said, there are many other identities that I could talk about, that I have. There are different roles that I play. One of the things that is really important to me in terms of AIDS activism actually is anti-racist activism. That ACT UP Philly is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. It's one of the largest AIDS activist groups in the country. It's actually, so ACT UP was the AIDS activist group. It started in New York in 1987, started here in Philly in 1988, and they were all autonomous groups that had their own power. There wasn't like a central ACT UP that was saying, okay, you do this, and in Ohio you work on this, and in Philly you work on this. It was organizations that just popped up because there were people that wanted to take on people in power, to hold their feet to the fire, to put pressure on them, to make them work on AIDS, to make them vote the right way, or stop saying messed up things, or whatever it is. And in Philly, you know, there's this picture of the AIDS epidemic. There's this picture of HIV that you probably have in your head, a similar one to the one that I have in my head, which is like a gay white man dying in a bed. That's like the face of AIDS, right? That AIDS is sort of stereotypically seen as a disease of gay white men. In Philly, the first person who was actually diagnosed with HIV, once we had the test that detects HIV in the blood, the first person was a straight African American female. Because it's Philly. Because that's who's here, right? And it is no surprise that the epidemic reflects who's in the city and not the stereotype, the sort of like the marginalized way that AIDS got talked about, it still gets talked about. But so working in AIDS in Philly, like if I was working in AIDS in Philly without an anti-racist perspective, I would be missing the picture. I would only be seeing a slice of the picture. So I see my work in ACT UP as one of the ways that I can sort of fight against racism in our society in a concrete way. Because the people who are leaders in ACT UP are people who are living with HIV. They're people who are marginalized in other pieces of their lives. A lot of them are people of color, people who traditionally haven't filled leadership roles, and this may be, in some cases, is the first time that they've really taken on a leadership role. And it's important for me to support them in that, to strengthen their leadership and not to build my own leadership in it. I mean, I want to do that too, but that's not the most important piece of it. So when Rich asked me to come in and talk about this sort of like list of things, including sexuality and racism and like all of this stuff, I wanted to give you a sense that it's not, that there's like, that the laundry list is not easily dividable. It's hard, and we think it's easy. In this country, everything is so black and white, and I mean that both in the like everything's really binary and the struggles of racism in this country are about people's inability to talk about relationships of all races, but also it's like, well, if you're black then you're this, and if you're white then you're this, and those are the only choices, which we know aren't true. And so I could talk for a long time. I don't want to just talk at you. I brought a couple of things for us to kind of like walk through together. And then for the folks who aren't here, I can leave copies. It will kind of mean, though, I mean, Rich is videotaping this, so they'll see it. But also I'm interested in helping you as once we get towards the end, like figure out how you want to talk about this with the other folks who aren't here, or if there are kind of ways that this impacts you or things you want to know more about that I can help you with. I mostly have done education at Philadelphia Fight, but now I do staff training and I manage the benefits, which is to say that my job got infinitely more boring like a year ago. And so doing stuff like this is really enlivening for me. I really value it, and I just want to say that like I appreciate you all taking the time out to hear this, and I appreciate Rich for asking me because I don't get to do stuff like this very often. So it's okay. It's not a huge group.
Thank you.
So we take one of those and fix it on. Well, so this is me, and I welcome you. You probably have.
I was just there.
Oh, really?
Well, I was at Society Hill Pediatrics.
Oh, at that building, yeah.
That's where. Oh.
Do you go to Society? Everybody in the room goes to Society. It took me an hour and a half to get seated.
Because everybody was there and everybody was sick.
No, there was no one there. I don't know why it took them so long.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's the building that I've worked in since 2000. It used to have a lot more AIDS service organizations in it, so I still sometimes refer to it as the AIDS Mall, even though it's too small.
Well, there's the building on the corner that has HIV test spelled out.
Yeah, Washington West.
Yeah.
So what I like to do as an educator is make myself an outline for stuff to talk about, but then I want to talk to you and not at you.
Yeah.
I want to talk with you. So one of my friends, Avenue Q, is his like absolute favorite musical. So I've heard it a lot. But you probably all know it better than I do at this point. So one of my questions was this sort of like this slide is like, what are some of the themes in Avenue Q? What are some of the things that come up again and again, like even if they're in the background?
Like homosexuality.
Homosexuality.
This idea of getting older and like the responsibilities that they think they have to take on as they get older. I think that's one of them, like a big one.
Yeah.
Friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's say that. I guess.
Racism.
Yeah, that's it.
Some homelessness.
Yeah.
It's not one part, but it's still tied to the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like finding yourself, I guess, or like figuring
Yeah.
out.
Growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember thinking when I was first hearing Avenue Q was the sort of like inclusion, that like finding a place for yourself, which is kind of both about finding yourself and finding a larger community for that. And there's this phrase, diversity, or not phrase, it's just a word, just one word, not a whole phrase. That is like, talk about buzzwords, like diversity is a buzzword that comes up a lot. But it's a little bit, for me, it's like when you hear the word diversity, what do you think about?
I think about
Mixture.
Like a big melting pot of culture.
I think about when I visited Vassar College, and on the pamphlet they had a whole group of black people, and I went there and I did not see. There was me and like 2 other mixed girls, and we were like, oh, I guess we should all be hanging out
They do
right
that
now.
a lot.
So we did.
It's always like it's an all-white campus, but they find like
They
the black
put, like,
people
the
and they
one-
put them on the floor shore.
And
So
they're
it's
always,
like,
like-
yeah, they're together. Like they didn't talk to each other in real life. Like,
Yeah, well, that actually reminds me, there's this article that's called, like, the title is literally, like, why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria?
Oh, yeah.
That's about the sort of, like, that at the high school
Yeah.
level, where it's not so much about, like, who they recruited or who is paid to be at that high school, but still about, like, the way that segregation
yeah, it's still.
works out, like, still happens, even
I feel
if it's
like we
not
do it to
formal.
ourselves sometimes.
Yeah, you kind of automatically go to the people that look like us. Like, you
Well, because
automatically-
but sometimes though, like white people can say like really insensitive
yeah,
stuff,
and then you're like, I don't want to be around.
yeah,
this.
like I don't want to have to deal with it. 'Cause
Every
it's like,
day.
do I say something? But then I'll be like the angry black girl. Like, do I not? Like, I don't know. I think that's probably it. More than
I
anything.
tend to segregate myself with Asians. I don't know how that works at all, but whenever I find myself in a crowd, I tend to float towards the Asian
always
kids
with the
somehow.
whites.
I don't know.
I've always been in the gifted program, so it's always mostly just been white
Yeah.
kids.
Mine has been like, my gifted program was always the Indians, the Asians, and like there was a select group of black people. There was a whole bunch of white people, and it was just like, that's the gifted program. And I was like, okay.
We're not that smart, really, but we just tend to hang out.
Well, and that it's stereotypes, right? It's like the fact that you all have these experiences with groups of people that weren't like, that's not just bias, that's like your history, right? It's not just like stereotype. But then when you think about it in terms of the sort of like conventional wisdom, it's like, oh well, Asians are smart, whites are everywhere, blacks are, like this sort of like, I don't even want to give credence to the stereotypes by saying them.
Yeah.
So I guess that whenever I think about the word diversity, I think about this sort of like, the image that I used was "It's a Small World After All," like the main frame from the app of that. We're like, that's a nice idea, but also that's really a cartoon. It's a cartoon with like one Mexican and one Chinese person and one black person, and like you don't even know where the black person's from. It's like that sort of the picture that hi Rich, sorry, I got distracted. The picture of like everybody just harmoniously together, like there's no difference. And it's true that we're all humans, that there is no like genetic or physiological difference. Not that there's no difference, but that there's no like difference between our species.
Yeah. It's
There's
not like
no-
we're like monkeys and humans or anything.
Right.
Same.
I mean,
Or, like
and
people and humans. Like the puppets, like we were talking about earlier, like we were throwing some logic at the play, and about how some are bears, some are monsters. Like that's made clear in the musical, but then the ones that aren't monsters are people. But then there's also humans, because some people just aren't puppets.
Oh, there's the puppet.
Yeah,
They're huge.
Are they heavy?
really-
Yeah, I'm
They're not heavy.
They're not heavy. They're just big.
If you're not used to having your arm up, then they're heavy.
I'm not.
But yeah, like there's
being
people
the guy
and
in the
there's
commercial with the
humans.
cats. Like, you're off that.
Okay.
Sorry.
yeah, but no, that's okay. I mean,
Bring it back.
come on, clearly I can like just wander away also.
Right.
So
Can I jump in for a second?
Okay.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, I picked the show because like it had room to do this. Like I wouldn't want to do a show that doesn't have different people working together, because that's part of our theater company, but it's also part of how I think the world should be. So just in terms of why we chose this,
We all have attention
it was
deficit.
that, and also it's about diversity, but also that our process is the same as what the characters go through the show, so that it kind of becomes a reality comes through. And in some ways, like the cast will be at that point in real life, and also as characters.
yeah. Well, and I think that the people and humans distinction is actually one that's really rich with potential. That like as a metaphor, that like some humans are more human than others in terms of mass culture. Some people don't count as people and some people do. Is like, I don't know if that's exactly how the creators of the show would talk about it, but that is like, to me, that's one of the worst aspects of these sort of like systems of oppression, is that they take whole groups of humans who are people and reduce them into like, oh yeah, well, you're a picture of a Mexican person, or you're a picture of a Chinese person, as though people didn't have these like complex full stories. Any of us could talk for hours about our journey so far in the world. None of us have time to actually like narrate everything that we've been through, because everything that we've been through is like however many years you've been alive, and all we have is right now, right here. Mm-hmm. So like we all have to, when we're telling our stories, we all have to reduce them. But the power of these systems of oppression is that it reduces people to like the lowest, smallest bit of themselves, which is never the full picture, and never their full potential. So one of the way that we talk about this at Fight, for a lot of the sort of radical movements that I'm a part of, is anti-oppression work rather than diversity. That we're actually thinking about not just like people's stereotypes, not just individuals maybe having prejudice or discrimination against other individuals, but what are the systems of power in play that perpetuate, that keep these systems of oppression going, and who benefits?